Around the world, you can find plenty of abandoned towns and cities. Places that were once thriving, but for one reason or another, people decided to leave behind. There are a lot of reasons this can occur. Poverty, famine, disease, natural disasters, just to name a few. In 1950, the last resident of the fishing town of Portlock, Alaska, finally cleared out and left the place behind. According to some versions of the tale, the reason the townspeople packed their bags and left was because something didn't want them there. Something not human. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the mystery surrounding the ghost town of Portlock, Alaska. Something caused people to abandon this once thriving cannery town. According to some popular legends, the reason everyone fled was because of a real-life monster. Portlock, Alaska is located in Port Chatham Bay, along the southern edge of the Kenai Peninsula. The now ghost town takes its name from the British naval captain Nathaniel Portlock, who sailed through the area back in 1786. There remains some debate whether Captain Portlock ever actually dropped anchor and set foot on the patch of land that bears his name. If we are to believe the popular legend, after Nathaniel Portlock and his men first found the bay, they couldn't believe their good fortune. No one could figure how such a prime area filled with game, fish, and shellfish would remain undisturbed. What Captain Portlock's men didn't know was that Spanish explorers actually did find this same area just 6 years earlier. Only they didn't stick around for long. Supposedly, these Spanish explorers began feeling uneasy from the minute they first stepped on shore. They became overwhelmed with the strange sensation that they were being watched. Over the nights that followed, Captain Portlock and his men became spooked by the area. They too began feeling as if someone was watching them from the forest. They began hearing strange noises in the middle of the night. Horrible, guttural cries could be heard, unlike any creature any of them had heard before. Pretty soon, Portlock's men began begging the captain to leave, and eventually he gave in. In 1867, a community of nomadic Sugpiaq people set up a camp along the shores of Portlock's Bay. Like the explorers before them, they too were amazed at the abundance of clams and other sea life they could fish for. They thought they were in for a long and prosperous stay in this area that was rich with food, but their joy was short-lived. Within a month, they were attacked. The Sugpiaq claimed that a group of cannibalistic giants raided their village many times. These creatures fought with brutal savagery, and the Sugpiaq were powerless to defend themselves. They named these giants Nantinuk, or Hairy Man. Eventually, the nomadic tribe fled the area and never looked back. Portlock, also known as Port Chatham, proved to be ideal for fishing. By the turn of the 20th century, an American company brought a fleet of fishing boats to the area and set up shop. They established the Portlock Cannery, and by 1921, the town had grown big enough that they were able to open a pool hall and United States Post Office. Although on the surface, things seemed to be going well for the small fishing village, rumors continued to spread that human beings weren't the only things living in the remote area. In 1905, several cannery workers walked off the job and refused to return until the following season, after many of them began claiming they saw an enormous hairy creature in the forest that walked on two legs and very clearly wasn't a bear. Over time, people began to report finding giant footprints along the beaches of Portlock. Others reported discovering large trees in the forest that had been ripped out of the ground and then shoved back in upside down with the roots sticking up into the sky. In the 1920s, a man named Albert Petka supposedly stumbled across the Nantinuk in the forest and tried chasing it off with his dogs, but the creature fought back and struck him with such a forceful blow to the chest that it ultimately killed him. But Petka remained alive long enough to tell people what he'd encountered. In 1973, an Anchorage newspaper ran an interview with a retired school teacher who had worked in Port Chatham during World War II. She told stories of several cannery workers who went hunting in the mountains for Dall sheep and bear, only to never return. Search parties went deep into the woods but were unable to locate any trace of them, although there were some stories that claimed that human remains actually were found. Just not all of them. According to some stories, after a series of heavy rains, body parts began washing down the mountain into a lagoon. There were severed limbs that had been torn from their sockets, and other body parts that were so horribly mangled that it was impossible to identify them. Other such tales include that of Andrew Camlock, who in 1931 went out logging. but was later found dead in the woods from a blow to the skull. This, of course, could have been either an accident or the work of a very human murderer. Although it appeared that the object used to kill him was a large piece of logging equipment that was far too heavy for a normal-sized man to lift on his own. Over time, more people began disappearing. A gold miner headed out for the day and never returned. No sign of that prospector was ever found. Sometime later, a man named Tom Larson claimed that he went out to chop some wood to build some fish traps when he spotted a large, hairy creature walking upright along the beach. Although Larson had a rifle with him, for some reason he decided not to shoot. A group of moose hunters claimed they came across gigantic humanoid footprints that exceeded 18 inches in length. As they closed in on the moose, they realized they weren't the only thing stalking the same prey. They followed these giant footprints for a distance as they led their way into the cloud-draped mountains. They eventually thought twice about what they were going to do, though, if they actually found whatever made those tracks and gave up their search. By the 1930s, many of the Russian Aleuts who worked in the cannery had become so frightened that they began moving out of town in droves. The cannery owners begged the workers to return and even set up armed guards in an attempt to bring them back to town, but by then, it was too little, too late. Over time, many residents began to fear the surrounding woods and ultimately abandoned their homes and moved away. By 1950, only the Portlock postmaster remained. When he finally left, the town was completely abandoned. Today, only a handful of structures remain standing. But even after Portlock was abandoned, the stories didn't end there. In 1968, a goat hunter claimed to have encountered a large creature that chased him through the woods. Then in 1973, 3 hunters took shelter during a 3-day storm in the abandoned town. They claimed that in the middle of the night, something walked around their tent on what sounded like 2 large, heavy feet. In 1990, an Anchorage paramedic was called out to assist a 70-year-old native who had suffered a heart attack while being held in the Eagle River Jail north of Portlock. The paramedic later said that while he was treating the unconscious man, he suddenly sat bolt upright, grabbed him by the shirt, and asked, "Did it bother you? Did you see it?" Over the years, there have been plenty of skeptics who have poked holes in these stories. Another much simpler explanation why Portlock may have been abandoned is because it was so remote and difficult to get to. There are no roads leading into the town. The only way in is by boat through the bay. After Alaska built a highway that bypassed the town, this pretty much signaled its end. In truth, official documentation on most of these mysterious deaths and disappearances that were reported over the years are difficult to come by. Although some of these tales were reported in local newspapers, most of the sources of these stories seem to be oral anecdotes passed around by locals. A lot of the stories I've mentioned here all come from a single source, a 1973 article in the Anchorage Daily News. This story was partially reprinted in a book by John Green titled Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us. Most surviving newspaper articles from the 1700s through 1963 only show a single death in the town. This was a man who reportedly died in some unnamed accident in 1920. Given that mining, lumbering, and commercial fishing are all considered very dangerous professions, the fact that there was only one death reported is surprising. But the legends surrounding the town of Portlock haven't diminished over the years. Locals who lived in the vicinity still talk about strange creatures living in the forest. Although some Sugpiaq people have been interviewed by reporters and admitted that the stories of the killer Nantinuk are made up. Even still, TV shows like the Discovery Channel's Alaska Killer Bigfoot have kept the legends of the beast alive. So is there a large deadly hominid stalking the forest near Portlock? Although the evidence doesn't seem to bear it out, you may want to decide for yourself whether you want to visit this desolate region, especially at night. Thanks for checking out this video. If you like it and you want to see more like it, click the video on the screen. Also be sure to like and subscribe for more creepy content just like it.